The July sky was as fickle as a child's temper. One moment, the sun beat down with a vengeance. The next, the heavens darkened. Evan remained motionless, head bowed, his gaze fixed on the name he hadn't seen in an eternity. The dilapidated house seemed to shrink under the weight of the storm clouds, plunged into a gloomy twilight. A low rumble of thunder sounded outside, and Evan blinked, finally stirring. He picked up Keith's phone, then reached for his father's hand, limp and dangling off the side of the sofa. He pressed the man's thumb to the sensor. The phone unlocked with a soft click. A man in a drunken stupor wasn't easily roused. Keith frowned, smacked his lips twice, and sank deeper into sleep. Evan opened the Venmo app and scrolled through the transaction history. It was a long list of payments, each with a simple memo: Evan July allowance, Evan June allowance, Evan May allowance. The sender's profile picture was an oil painting of sunflowers. Evan stared at the image for a long moment, licking his dry lips before reaching for his own phone. He sent a quick text explaining that he wasn't going to the library today. Shane replied almost instantly, asking why. The Northwood summer air, thick and muggy even with the rain, filled Evan's lungs as he typed a one-word answer. Raining. He shoved his phone back into his pocket and sat on a low wooden stool by the coffee table, gripping Keith's phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He stared into the middle distance, swallowing hard and forcing himself to take deep, measured breaths. An unknowable amount of time passed before he stood and went to his room, digging out a pack of cigarettes he hadn't touched in months. He lit one, the first drag catching in his throat, harsh and unfamiliar. He took another, more deliberate pull before returning to the phone's history. It took a long time to scroll to the very beginning. The first message was from September 2014. Sandra had sent Keith $50. Keith had responded with contempt, asking who he thought he was kidding. He demanded to know how many meals $50 was supposed to buy his son. Sandra's reply was simple. It was all she could give him at the time. Keith told her to go to hell, threatening that if he didn't see $100 next month, he'd let the boy starve. The $100 payments continued for 4 months. Then Keith sent a picture. Evan tapped it open. It was a photo of himself from 8th grade, taken on a day Keith had hit him so hard one of his ears was slick with blood. Keith's messages followed, a brutal torrent. He had warned her, he typed, that he'd beat the kid every single time she dared to sneak back for a visit. He called her a whore who had run off with some other asshole and had the nerve to come crawling back to see her son. Sandra pleaded with him to stop, begging him not to hurt Evan. She told him she was sending $200 and asked him to please take Evan to a doctor. Keith's response was a single word: send. He then warned her not to even think about calling the cops, reminding her that the last time she did, he'd only spent a couple of weeks in county jail. He promised that if she ever sent him back, the first thing he'd do upon release was beat Evan to death, then burn her house down and her new husband's house too. He had nothing to lose, he taunted, unlike her and her new life. In mid-2015, Keith had messaged her asking if it was true her parents' old property had been sold. From now on, he demanded he wanted $500 a month. At the end of 2016, he wrote again, this time asking if the rumors about her new art gallery were true. He offered congratulations, then immediately raised the price to $800 a month. Sandra had only asked how Evan was doing. Keith sent a photo, telling her he was just fine, perhaps satisfied with the timely payments, or perhaps realizing he was losing his physical hold on a growing Evan. Keith's tone had softened slightly in the last 2 years. At least, the open hostility in their chat log had subsided. Then, at the start of this year, Keith had messaged again, asking if she and her new family were really moving to Canada. He swore at her, marveling at her good fortune. Starting today, he declared he wanted $1,200 a month. Her son was in high school now, and the kid could eat a damn horse. By the time Evan finished reading, the cigarette pack was half empty. He took one last drag from the butt between his fingers, a profound chill seeping into his bones, making his blood run cold. His mind felt as though it were pierced by 1,000 invisible needles, the pain so sharp it stole his breath. A terrible, dark thought, one he had suppressed for years, began to fester and spread like a virus through his brain. He looked at the man passed out on the sofa as if he were already a corpse awaiting burial. The summer storm unleashed its full fury, the rain coming down fast and hard. Evan sat without expression, his mind replaying a certain sequence of events over and over. Amidst the drumming of rain against the window pane, his own phone vibrated silently. It was a message from Shane, asking if he wanted to video chat. The message jolted him back to reality. His jaw tightened as his fingers, stiff as wood, tapped out a reply. Later, Evan crushed the cigarette out, dropped his head, and rubbed his face hard several times. Then he picked up Keith's phone again and sent a message to the sunflower avatar. Don't send him any more money. He opened the Venmo app, entered the full amount of Keith's balance, and once again used the sleeping man's thumb to authorize the transfer. The transaction woke Keith with a start. The room was cast in a strange half-light that made it impossible to tell the time. He turned his head and was startled to see Evan standing silently beside him. In the dimness, the scene felt ripped from a horror movie. He grumbled, asking what he was doing standing there, trying to give him a heart attack. As he sat up, rubbing the crick in his neck, his eyes fell on the phone in Evan's hand. He lunged for it instinctively, but Evan sidestepped him with ease. Keith stared at him in disbelief, demanding to know what he was doing with his phone. Only after confirming the transfer was complete did Evan look up. He stated calmly that Keith had been taking money from her. His voice was level, but the words struck Keith like a thunderclap. If Keith had still been drunk, or if this had been a few years ago, he might not have been afraid. But things were different now. Not only could he no longer win a fight against Evan, but his old injuries still ached. Most importantly, there was something deeply unsettling in the way Evan was looking at him. Keith had never moved so fast in his life. He scrambled off the sofa and bolted into his bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind him. In the darkness, the frantic pounding of his heart was deafeningly clear. The next moment, a vicious kick slammed into the door, causing the lower panel to buckle inward before snapping back into place. Evan's voice came from the other side, cold and devoid of emotion. He reminded Keith of his promise that he hadn't been in contact with her. He punctuated the sentence with a curse. Another kick landed, shaking the cheap wood. Keith, feeling a bit safer with the door between them, pressed his back against it and shouted that it was part of their agreement. She could have her divorce, he yelled, as long as she paid his living expenses every month. Evan's voice was dangerously quiet. He asked him to repeat that, whose living expenses. Keith retorted that the bitch had left money for him when she left, not to mention what his grandfather had given him. He spat that Evan wasn't short on cash, asking who the hell he thought paid the bills around here. The door shuddered under another blow. Evan's voice was like ice when he warned him to never call her that again. Keith, emboldened by the barrier, sneered. He yelled that she was the one who started sleeping with the manager at the grocery store first. She cheated, he screamed. She was the one at fault. Otherwise, why would the court have given him custody? He asked what else you call a woman like that. He was about to add that everyone on the whole damn street knew his mother was a slut when a tremendous bang echoed from the door behind him. Evan's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. He said that, after taking a beating from him every day, only an idiot would want to spend their life with a piece of shit like him. Keith's heart skipped a beat. He genuinely believed Evan could kick the door down. He changed his tactic, his voice dripping with scorn. He questioned why, if Evan was so protective of her, she hadn't taken him with her when she walked out. He shouted, demanding to know why she didn't take him when she finally left for good, forcing the divorce. He delivered the final, cruel blow, informing Evan that it was because her new man didn't want him. He wouldn't let her marry him if she brought a son along. Silence fell on the other side of the door. Outside, The thunder rolled and the rain poured down as if the sky itself were collapsing. Keith, sensing a victory, let out a breath. After a moment, he said that now Evan finally understood. He claimed that he and Evan were on the same side. A muffled voice from the hallway shattered his illusion. Evan said he already knew. No one knew better than he did. Standing before the locked door, his fists clenched, Evan felt his mind being violently dragged back 4 years. Sandra had endured Keith's abuse for 7 years. Did he really think she had only tried to leave once? She had packed her bags countless times, slipped out of the house in the dead of night more times than he could count. But she was always held back by her son. Her son, who would always cry her name, who would always tug on her clothes, who would always stand at the window watching her go. And so the woman would return, her face buried in her hands, and carry him back to his room, whispering reassurances through her own tears as she lulled him to sleep, before making a hushed call to a stranger. Until the last time. It had been raining then too, just like now. He watched Sandra get out of bed, pack her things, and open the front door. As she left, she kept looking back into his room. He had pretended to be asleep the entire time. He watched her walk out of the apartment complex. Every time Sandra looked up at his window, he would duck down, hiding, biting his own fist to stifle the sobs that racked his body. He knew he couldn't make a sound. Otherwise, Keith would wake up. Otherwise, his mom would come back again. Hearing his quiet admission, Keith was stunned. He asked how he could possibly know that. Evan had no interest in explaining. He gave the door one final, resounding kick and then calmly issued a. He told Keith that if he ever found out he had contacted her again, he would break both his legs. With that, Evan turned and walked away. He couldn't stay in the same space as Keith right now. He couldn't guarantee what he might do. Fine, Keith called out, he got it. But he had one more thing to tell him. After a long silence from within the room, his voice emerged again. He said he'd had someone look into her situation earlier this year. She had another kid, he said, born last year. Another boy. He mused that it made sense now why she was so keen on moving away, what with the better schools over there, certainly better than that dump Evan was attending now. He told Evan to face it, his mother had abandoned him long ago. No matter how much Evan hated him, he was still his father, and they were stuck together for life. The torrential rain, combined with the violent sounds of Evan kicking the door, had prompted the neighbors to double-lock their own doors. A corrugated plastic awning over the first-floor entrance of the rundown building amplified the sound of the rain, the large drops hitting it with a deafening, percussive rattle. Evan walked out of the apartment, closed the door behind him, and stopped. He had managed to hold back, to not lay a hand on Keith, yet he felt more exhausted than ever before. He stood there for a long time before finally turning to descend the stairs. His mind was a chaotic mess, a jumble of words and images echoing and replaying without end. He was so lost in the fog that he reached the bottom step before realizing someone was standing in front of him. Shane was there, an umbrella leaning against the wall beside him. Evan stared, speechless, for a long time. He wanted to ask why he was here, how long he'd been waiting, but when he tried to speak, his throat was too dry, the words catching. Shane seemed to read the questions in his eyes. He said he remembered seeing Evan scale the fence during that freak thunderstorm last year and figured a little rain wouldn't scare him off. He added quietly that he'd been here for a while. Evan managed a faint noise of acknowledgement. Shane stepped forward and reached out to hug him. Evan instinctively tried to push him away, but it was useless. He was pulled into a firm embrace. Shane murmured that he would let go as soon as someone came. So Evan stopped struggling, letting his exhausted body sag against Shane's shoulder. It was a pure, simple embrace. Shane's shoulders were broad and warm, a source of profound comfort. Evan closed his eyes and buried his face in the crook of Shane's neck. In the sudden darkness, his world narrowed to the sound of the rain and the solid presence of Shane. Shane. Evan didn't move, his voice a muffled sound against Shane's shirt. Yeah. Let's get out of here. Senior year is the last one, he said, just study hard. We'll apply to the same schools. And then we'll get married. Get lost. It took a long moment for the person leaning on him to choke out the words. Feeling the dampness spreading on his shoulder, Shane fell silent and raised a hand, gently running it through Evan's hair. Evan hadn't cried in a long time. Crying was a sign of weakness, of being pathetic, of losing face. So when he felt the hot sting of tears, he tried desperately to hold them back. But Shane's hand on his head was like a switch had been flipped, and his control shattered. And so, with Shane's fingers gently carding through his hair, he wept with a deep, burning sense of shame. It was so damn humiliating. The summer storm, having arrived with abrupt violence, departed just as quickly. The chaotic drumming on the awning overhead began to subside. Evan, his face buried in Shane's t-shirt, decided with grim resignation to stay there until the fabric was dry. A faint, grating squeak from above made Evan's heart leap. He instantly pushed himself away from Shane, grabbing the railing for support as he looked up, his body tense with alarm. The old staircase stretched up into the oppressive, silent darkness. Shane followed his gaze, asking what was wrong. Evan listened intently, but the brief sound didn't repeat. No one came down the stairs. He asked hesitantly if Shane had heard anything. Shane said he hadn't. Had he imagined it? Evan had lived in this building for 17 years. The sound he'd heard was the strained groan of a poorly oiled door hinge. But it was so faint, a single, fleeting noise, that he couldn't be sure if it was real or a product of his frayed nerves. He hesitated for a moment before taking a few steps up the stairs to check. The door to the second-floor apartment was shut tight, everything exactly as it had been when he came down. Shane asked in a low voice what he'd heard, starting to follow, but Evan stopped him after 2 steps. He said it was nothing, he must have misheard. The sound had yanked him out of his emotional haze, making him acutely aware that they were standing in the open entryway of his building, surrounded by other apartments where anyone could see them. After confirming the stairwell was empty, he breathed a sigh of relief and blinked his dry, stinging eyes. It was always like this for him. The after effects of crying were severe. His eyes would be swollen and red for hours. It was why, after Keith used to beat him, Sandra would have to apply a cold compress not just to his wounds, but to his eyes as well. Shane stared at his reddened eyelids for a moment. The next second, Evan clapped a hand over his eyes. "What are you looking at?" He tugged on Shane's shirt, his voice cold. "Let's go." The rain had weakened, and the large black umbrella Shane had brought was just big enough for 2 teenage boys. As they left the complex, Evan couldn't resist looking back, one hand still shielding his eyes, his head tilted up. The lights in the second-floor window were off. No one was there. Shane glanced at his boyfriend's precarious posture and asked if he could see where he was going. "Of course," Evan retorted, turning his head forward and lowering his gaze to the wet pavement. He wasn't blind. Shane started to ask if he wanted to buy some eye drops but was cut off. "Shut up, Shane." The hand over his face clenched into a fist, then relaxed. "Or I'll punch you so hard you forget your own name." Shane tilted the umbrella forward slightly, obscuring his own face as well. "If you laugh, I'll punch you too," the cold voice beside him added. Shane asked where they were going. The public library was always packed during the summer break. There would be no seats left at this hour, so Evan took Shane to the cyber cafe he frequented. It was near his old neighborhood, far grittier than the sleek gaming lounges downtown. Neither of them had eaten breakfast or lunch. Shane disappeared for a few minutes and returned from a nearby deli with 2 large cups of chili, finding his boyfriend slouched in a chair, legs crossed, scowling at the computer screen. He set the food down and glanced at the monitor. A list of admission scores for various universities in the state capital filled the screen. While Evan hadn't seriously considered which college he wanted to attend, he knew that with Shane's grades, he'd be aiming for the top-tier state schools. Shane picked up a plastic spoon and held a bite of chili to his lips. Evan, his eyes still glued to the screen, turned his head and took it. He mumbled Shane's name. As the mouse scrolled to the bottom of the page, he stated flatly that he wasn't running away with him. When Shane asked why, the answer was blunt. Can't get in. Evan did a quick mental calculation. With his current scores, the only way he was getting into one of those schools was as a dishwasher in the cafeteria. Shane reached out, his finger hovering a few centimeters from the screen, and tapped on the names of a few less competitive, but still respectable, universities. He said that these were possibilities. Evan turned to look at him, his expression blank. He told Shane that his scores were over 100 points below the cutoff for those. Shane just said that they still had a year. He speared another piece of ground beef and held it out. Evan met his gaze for a long moment before leaning forward and taking the bite. Since they were already at the cyber cafe, Evan, his stomach full, decided to message his friends for a game. While he waited for them to log on, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting over to Shane's monitor. Evan's eyes widened. Shane was browsing a list of apartment rentals that matched the search criteria. Capital City, Queen Bed, easy transit access, quiet, spacious. Just as he was about to click on a promising listing, the cursor moved on its own. It was guided to the top right corner of the window and clicked the X. Evan released his grip on Shane's mouse and turned back to his own screen, the tips of his ears burning as he announced stiffly that he was staying in the dorms. It was late when Shane got home. He pulled out his phone, opening his top contact as he unlocked his front door. He paused mid-text when he pushed the door open and saw the light spilling from inside. The voice from the living room was smooth and professional. She confirmed that was great. She'd been meaning to get in touch about that very thing. She asked if a parent's signature was required to finalize it. She assured the person on the other end that it was no problem. She would be happy to sign. She requested they notify her once everything was confirmed. The ornate chandelier cast a bright light throughout the room. Eleanor sat on the sofa, her posture elegant and poised even while on the phone. Hearing the door, she glanced over and offered a faint smile into the receiver before saying her goodbyes. She hung up and rose from the sofa, asking where he'd been so late and if he'd had dinner. He confirmed he had, slipping his phone into his pocket. She mentioned she'd had the housekeeper save him some soup and suggested he have some before bed. Shane declined, asking why she was back so early. He thought she was supposed to be busy until next week. She explained that things wrapped up ahead of schedule. She rubbed her temples, stating that most of the company's business had been transferred stateside, and her divorce from his father was official. From now on, she wouldn't have to travel so much. Shane stood quietly for a moment before asking if she was okay. Eleanor paused, then nodded. She said she was fine, everything had been handled well. Because her ex-husband had been the one to cheat, and had even fathered a child older than Shane, she had received a much more favorable settlement than she'd anticipated. She told him this was his most crucial year, and now she could finally be home to support him. She announced she had already started looking at condos in the capital so that when he got into the university, she could move with him. He cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. He said he would be renting his own place. Eleanor's expression faltered. She insisted that renting was unsafe and unsanitary. In the past, Shane would have simply acquiesced. Their interactions always followed this pattern. She made a demand, and he complied in silence, rarely offering even a token of resistance. But this time, he repeated himself. I'm renting my own place. The smile slowly vanished from Eleanor's face. Mother and son stood in a silent standoff for a long moment. With senior year looming, she knew she couldn't afford to create conflict with him now. A senior's mind was a fragile thing. Besides, there was a whole year to go. They could discuss it again after he was accepted. She let the tension in her expression ease, saying they would talk about it later. She then changed the subject, asking if school started next week and declaring that she would drive him on the first day. Perhaps because their conflict hadn't escalated into a physical fight, Keith remained in the house. They continued to treat each other like ghosts until the day before school started. Evan returned from picking up a package and kicked the sofa where Keith was lying. Keith, his eyes glued to a baseball game, asked what he wanted without looking up. Evan demanded to know if he had contacted her again. Keith knew exactly who he meant. He said no, and told him to get out of the way. He was blocking the TV. Evan, not believing him, demanded his phone. After scrolling through the messages and finding nothing, he tossed the phone back with a sigh of relief. Keith grumbled that if he broke it, he was buying him a new one. He fiddled with the phone for a moment, then looked up. He asked why Evan hadn't been going out lately. Evan, who had been about to go to his room, turned back with a questioning look. Keith was silent for a couple of seconds before muttering that having him hanging around the house all day was annoying. Evan didn't bother to reply, simply slamming his bedroom door shut. Eleanor had been traveling non-stop for the past 6 months. Now that she was back, her days were filled with lunches with relatives and dinner parties at their home, each of which Shane was required to attend. There was no time to spare. As a result, they had only managed one trip to the library that week. For the rest of the time, they had reverted to their old routine of video calls to go over schoolwork. But with school starting soon, it didn't matter. Evan opened the package. Inside was a small security camera. He scanned his room for the best place to install it. People usually bought these things to watch their pets. It was motion activated and would send an alert to his phone if it detected any movement in the room. Ever since he caught Keith going through his things, he'd been more cautious. With school starting, he knew he wouldn't be able to focus in class without it. Installation was simple. After checking the feed on his phone a few times, he lay back on his bed and reopened the app he had been looking at earlier. The person who had so adamantly declared he was staying in the dorms had, upon returning home, apparently started looking up apartments as well. The further Evan scrolled, the tighter his brow furrowed. He ran a hand through his bangs in frustration. Why was rent in the capital so damn expensive? He tossed his phone aside and stared at the ceiling, mentally calculating his savings. His mother hadn't worked for a long time before she left, so the money she'd given him wasn't much. His living expenses for the past few years had come from the inheritance his grandfather left him. Keith had been addicted to a type of high-speed online gambling, losing money hand over fist. His grandfather, seeing him as a lost cause and already having a strained relationship with him, had left Keith almost nothing, secretly giving the bulk of it to Evan. But it wasn't a huge sum, and after several years it was nearly gone. Evan closed his eyes with a soft curse, rubbing his face in regret. If he'd known, he would have smoked less. Cigarettes were so damn expensive. He was contemplating the logistics of working a part-time job while in college when his phone buzzed several times. It was the group chat already planning a basketball game for the first day of school. Leo was laying down the terms. The losing class buys the winning class pizza. He was getting a large with extra pepperoni. Andy shot back that it was a deal, and to get ready to watch Evan dunk on their whole team. Leo retorted that Andy had better not have Shane guarding him. Andy scoffed, asking if he was serious. A scholar like Shane wasn't there to guard him. He played the same position. He told the other team to start thinking about their toppings now because they were going to eat them out of house and home. Evan, currently stressing about money, was pleased by the prospect of a free meal. He typed out a reply suggesting they could make it a regular thing. Just as he was about to hit send, a new message popped up. It was from Shane. He wrote that he and Evan would leave after the game. They wouldn't be staying for pizza. Evan stared at the message. What? Chloe replied with a confused emoji, and Andy asked what was up. Where were they going? Shane's reply was vague. We have other plans. Evan was baffled. Did they? What plans? Surely, Shane wasn't planning on dragging him back to the classroom to do homework after a basketball game. He stared at the screen for a moment, then suddenly got up from his bed. With his ears turning red, he walked over to his packed backpack and emotionlessly tossed in a pack of gum. The group chat was still buzzing. Andy said it was no problem, Chloe and Tina could have Evan and Shane's shares. Leo cursed him out, accusing him of never taking a loss. He asked who would fill their last 2 spots. Andy replied that it would be Leo and Mark. Leo's message appeared a moment later, asking what they were talking about. He'd just seen the messages. Andy told him they were talking about the game tomorrow, and that he'd already signed him up. They were going to crush the other team after school. Leo didn't reply again, presumably catching up on the chat history. After a few more rounds of trash talk between Andy and Leo, just as the conversation was about to pivot to borrowing homework, Leo's icon popped up again. He sent a single emoji, then typed a class basketball game. Then he and Shane can't play. He followed up with another message. Haven't you guys heard? The school is bringing back the honors track. Leo's message dropped like a bomb, and the chat fell silent. After a long pause, someone finally spoke. Andy wrote that it wasn't April Fool's Day and told his deskmate not to joke around. He asked if the honors track hadn't been shut down by the district. Was Northwood High really bold enough to bring it back after just 1 semester? Leo insisted he wasn't kidding. He just found out himself. He said it seemed like a group of parents had petitioned the board, and they'd relented. Shane leaned back in his chair, his finger hovering over the screen. Before he could type anything, his bedroom door opened. Eleanor entered with a glass of milk. She said she had warmed it for him, asking if he didn't have to give a speech at the senior assembly tomorrow. She told him to drink it and go to bed. The principal of Northwood High believed that seniors needed not just academic rigor, but constant motivation and encouragement. While other schools held a single assembly 100 days before graduation, Northwood started the academic year with a mandatory shot of adrenaline. A few days ago, the head teacher, Mr. Howard, had contacted Shane and asked him to be the student representative speaker. The warm milk was placed in front of him. Eleanor glanced at his phone. She commented on him being on his phone so late, remarking that he seemed a bit obsessed with his devices lately. With his other hand, Shane set down his pen, the phone still in his grasp. He turned off the screen, looked at the milk, then lifted his head. He asked if she already knew about the class change. Eleanor paused, her gaze meeting his. Yes, she admitted. She asked if the school had already notified them. She had been planning to arrange the transfer herself, but the school had contacted her first. They argued that putting the honors students back in the regular classes at this stage would be unfair to them. The honors curriculum was far more advanced, and rejoining the regular track would mean repeating material, which would negatively impact their academic performance. They had collected signatures from parents and submitted a formal request to the district. After consideration, the district had agreed. Their class would be the last honors track at Northwood High. She framed it as a good thing, didn't he think? She patted his shoulder and told him to finish his drink, pack his things for tomorrow, and get some sleep. After Eleanor left, Shane turned his phone back on. There was already a new message waiting for him. I'll help you move your books upstairs tomorrow. With the break being only 3 weeks, most of them had left their textbooks in the classroom. The message contained no pleading, no sadness. It was as if being in different classes was a trivial, ordinary thing. And suddenly, Shane felt a sense of relief. He thought about Eleanor's offer to drive him to school. After opening and closing Evan's contact info several times under the desk lamp, he replied with a touch of regret. Don't worry about it. The next day, Eleanor drove Shane to school herself, without even calling the driver. On the way, she gave him a long list of gentle reminders and instructions. She had been like this for the past few days, as if trying to make up for 6 months of missed nagging. Shane listened in silence, the question of whether he could transfer back to his old class hovering on his lips, but he never said it. Eleanor would never agree, and he wasn't ready to put Evan under her microscope just yet. It was only 2 semesters, he reasoned. When they arrived at the school, Eleanor bustled around, despite Shane's repeated assurances that he didn't need any help. She went to the main office to speak with his teachers, then took Shane's student ID to add money for his lunch account, and finally went to his new classroom to help him organize his books. She asked if he could see the board from his seat. He confirmed he could. She noted that his desk was right under the air conditioning vent, which wasn't good. She offered to speak with the teacher about getting him a new seat. He told her it wasn't necessary. She relented. She told him that now that she was back, she wanted to see all his test papers after every exam. She had also looked through his notebook of corrected mistakes and found it messy. Even for drafts, she said, he needed to maintain neatness. He agreed. Shane's new deskmate, Leo, sat beside them in stunned silence, listening to the exchange. Finally, the woman glanced at him. "Hello," Eleanor said with a smile. "I'm Shane's mother." Leo stammered a greeting. Eleanor continued, explaining that Shane was prone to getting distracted, and requested that, if possible, Leo try not to disturb him during class. Shane finally looked up and cut her off, his tone flat. "Mom, the assembly is about to start. You should go home." By the time Eleanor got back to her car, the music for the school-wide assembly was already playing over the loudspeakers. She had wanted to stay and watch her son's speech. She relished seeing Shane shine, a beacon of excellence among his peers. After a spectacularly failed, humiliating marriage, her child had become her pride, her greatest source of emotional support. Unfortunately, she couldn't yet devote herself entirely to him. With the business just transitioning stateside, there were still too many loose ends to tie up. She had a busy period ahead of her. Eleanor fastened her seatbelt, quickly replied to a few urgent emails, and put on her sunglasses, ready to leave. Just then, two sharp raps sounded on her car window. Eleanor turned and met the eyes of the man leaning down to peer into her car. She frowned instinctively. The man grinned at her, then knocked again, two dull thuds. Eleanor gripped the steering wheel, fighting a strange wave of discomfort as she lowered the window just a crack. "Can I help you?" she asked. With the return of the honors class, Class 1, all the other classes had to shift their positions on the field during the assembly to make room. In the formation for Class 7, Andy was slumped over, still in denial that the school year had begun. He whined about why they had to be back in class already. He felt like he had just gotten out for summer. He argued that a 20-day break hardly qualified as a summer vacation. He lamented that he'd come back from break to find his deskmate gone. Leo, from the adjacent class line, theatrically cleaned out his ear and asked him what he was crying about. Wasn't having a desk to himself better? Andy retorted that it was lonely as hell. There was no one to talk to. Then a thought struck him. He turned to look at the other person in their class who had also lost a deskmate. "Hey, Evan, does this mean we can be deskmates again?" Leo scoffed from the side, telling him to keep dreaming. He asked if Andy really thought their teacher would ever let the two of them sit together. Andy argued that it might have been impossible before, but not now. He jabbed a thumb over his shoulder. "My boy here," he boasted, "is now in the top 500 of our year. And my grades have improved too. If we both asked Ms. Peterson together, maybe she'd actually consider it." A cold voice from behind cut him off. "No." Andy asked why not. Evan, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his eyelids drooping with disinterest, replied that he was too loud. It would affect his studies. Andy and Leo were speechless. There was something surreal about hearing those words come from Evan's mouth. Even though he had been studying hard lately, his tough guy persona hadn't quite caught up. Just as Andy was about to argue, he caught sight of a familiar figure and blurted out that it was Shane's turn to speak. The head that had been drooping immediately shot up. Shane's school uniform was so crisp and white it made Mr. Howard's shirt look yellowed by comparison. His broad shoulders filled out the uniform perfectly, and he held the speech manuscript casually in his fingers. "Hello, everyone. I'm Shane from Class 1. The teenager's cool voice echoed across the field. Shane clearly hadn't put much thought into the speech. He read from the paper in his hand from start to finish. This allowed Evan to watch him unabashedly, his chin tilted up. After reading the script without a trace of emotion, Shane folded the paper and walked off the stage. As he approached their class line, Evan instinctively straightened up, preparing to step aside to let him pass. But Shane walked right past Class 7's formation and continued forward. Evan paused for a second, then let his shoulders slump back into their usual slouch. Many others in the class followed Shane's progress with their eyes. Andy turned to stare at the distant Class 1 formation and muttered under his breath that it felt strange. He wondered aloud if the prodigy had ever really been in their humble class. Evan didn't say anything, but he also turned his head to stare in the direction of Class 1. He scanned the sea of heads until he found the one that was perfectly still and upright, and his expression soured. Shane's clean, well-fitted uniform had always looked out of place in Class 7, a stark contrast to the rest of them. But back in Class 1, it blended in seamlessly. The students around him were just as meticulous, their buttons fastened all the way to the top, though none of them wore it as well as he did. The night before, when Evan heard about the class change, he hadn't thought it was a big deal. Shane had never been on the same academic track as the rest of their class anyway. It was better for him to be back in the honors program. They were still in the same school. They could see each other whenever they wanted. But now that they were actually separated, it suddenly felt like they were worlds apart. Their classrooms were separated by 4 floors. Their gym classes were on different days. Even on the field, they were separated by 6 whole classes. And another thing, from the moment he walked on stage to the moment he walked off, Shane hadn't looked at him once. TSK. Just as Evan was about to look away, the perfectly upright head dipped down slightly, and an arm bent. A second later, the phone in Evan's pocket vibrated. It was a message from Shane. "Wait for me after school." Evan stared at the words for a moment, then replied with a cool K. When he looked up again, his lazy, indifferent expression had returned. It was the last period of the day. Shane was working through a set of problems when he heard a ripple of whispers around him. People were asking what he was doing here. Someone else said it was scary. He looked like he was here to cause trouble. Another student suggested they all walk home together. Shane sat in the last row of the classroom. He stopped writing and looked up, following the gazes of his classmates toward the front door. He saw his boyfriend. Evan was leaning against the low wall outside the Class 1 classroom, his oversized uniform hanging off him haphazardly. He was chewing gum, his eyes scanning the students inside with a bored, arrogant air. Their eyes met. Evan blew a bubble and popped it, his expression a clear command. "Hurry up." Shane raised an eyebrow in response. "I can't." Evan was not a patient person. 5 minutes later, he had turned to scan the small figures on the basketball court below, searching for the friends he had bailed on. 10 minutes later, he was leaning against the wall by a window, staring ominously at the blackboard. He couldn't understand a single thing they were talking about. The student sitting by the window shivered, not daring to look up. 15 minutes later, Evan had moved to the front door, leaning against the frame, his face a mask of impatience. The teacher met his gaze and faltered mid-sentence. Evan stared back, a silent challenge in his eyes. Shane lowered his head, spinning his pen, and turned his face towards the window to hide a muffled laugh. Shane was the first one out of the classroom after the final bell. When he stood in front of him, Evan demanded in a cold voice why his teacher dragged the class on for so long. The teacher, who was walking out behind him, froze. Shane replied that it happened sometimes. He asked why Evan had come all the way up. Evan retorted, "Didn't you tell me to wait for you?" Shane clarified that he meant for him to wait in his own classroom. Many of the students in Class 1 stayed after school to study, so it wasn't a good place to talk. He adjusted his backpack strap, his fingers lightly brushing the back of Evan's hand. "Let's go," he said, "back to Class 7. Ms. Peterson stood up, gathering the stack of graded summer homework. She had just stepped out of the office when she ran into the math teacher from downstairs. The teacher asked if she was heading home. Ms. Peterson smiled and said not yet. She explained that she had a morning appointment and wouldn't be in, so she was going to drop the papers on her desk in the classroom for the students to hand out. The other teacher hesitated for a moment before mentioning that she had just seen the boy with the 2 moles on his face from her class, looking for Shane outside the Class 1 classroom. Reading the concern in her colleague's expression, Ms. Peterson quickly nodded and reassured her that it was fine. They were desk mates in her class before, she explained, they're good friends. The other teacher looked relieved. She said her goodbyes and headed off. Ms. Peterson continued toward her classroom on the 3rd floor. It was well after school hours, and with it being the first day back, the students had all left early. The 3rd floor was quiet, almost deserted. Lost in thought about rearranging the seating chart, she found herself at the back door of Class 7 without realizing it. There was someone inside. Teachers have an unfortunate habit of enjoying surprise inspections. Hearing a low murmur, she slowed her steps and peeked through the back window, a gratified smile spreading across her face. At the very last desk in the back row, 2 boys in white uniform shirts sat shoulder to shoulder, just as they always had. One was holding a pen, sketching on a piece of scratch paper, his low, cool voice explaining a problem. The other was slouched in his seat, his arm propped on the desk, his head resting against it. It was hard to tell if he was paying attention. Just as Ms. Peterson was about to enter, the lesson ended. The one who had been explaining set down his pen, reached over, and brushed the hair back from the other boy's forehead. Then he leaned in. The setting sun, sliced into long slivers by the window blinds, bathed them in a warm, golden light. There, in the silence of the empty school, they shared a quiet, intimate kiss. Ms. Peterson's foot, which had been raised to step inside, froze in midair. Her mind went completely blank. Senior year was a different world. The change was palpable just from the atmosphere in the school building. The hallways, once chaotic and noisy during breaks, were now eerily quiet. A countdown to graduation now adorned the blackboard in every classroom, casting a pall of oppressive anxiety over everything. Leo used to wonder how some of his rowdier friends could suddenly become so quiet and focused in their senior year. Now he was starting to understand. Every time he went to Class 7 during a break and saw his 2 friends with their heads down, buried in their work, he lost all motivation to goof off. Evan and Andy were still sitting at separate desks. They hadn't asked the teacher to move them, and the teacher seemed to have forgotten about it. "Stop studying. Take a break," Leo urged, slipping in through the back door of Class 7 and plopping down in the empty seat next to Andy. "Wanna play ball after school?" Andy, without looking up from his textbook, replied that he couldn't, he had tutoring. Leo was incredulous. More tutoring? He asked how many days a week he had to go. He told him it was overkill. Andy explained that his dad had promised to buy him a car for college if he could get into a decent university. All his hard work now was an investment in their future coolness. He painted a picture for Leo. Imagine years from now, Leo is picking up cans by the side of the road, and he, Andy, rolls up in a luxury car to take him out clubbing. Wouldn't all the other can pickers be green with envy? Leo told him to screw off, he wasn't going to be picking up cans. Andy shot back, then why wasn't he studying? He pointed out that even Evan had turned over a new leaf. What right did he have to be slacking off? Evan, already frustrated with a difficult problem, grew even more annoyed at the mention of his name. He leaned back in his chair, about to tell them both off, when Chloe turned around and handed him a form. She told him to ignore them and sign it. The school was requiring each class to submit a sign-up sheet for voluntary Saturday tutoring. She instructed him to pass it to the next row when he was done. The form listed each student's personal information. Evan took it and scribbled his name, then noticed Shane's information was listed right below his. He instinctively moved to sign for him as well. "Wait!" Tina, another classmate, turned around and whispered for him to stop. She explained that the teacher had made a mistake when printing the forms. Students who had transferred out didn't need to sign. Evan's pen froze. He came back to himself, put the pen down, and muttered a quiet "oh" before passing the form to Andy. Andy took it, glanced at it, and exclaimed in surprise, Damn. Evan, when did your handwriting get so good? Chloe leaned over, propping her elbow on Evan's desk to peek at his scratch paper. She scoffed, asking if he was kidding. It still looked like chicken scratch. Andy insisted that his signature looked good. Look at Evan and Shane. He paused, a realization dawning on him. He looked at Evan in shock. Evan, you didn't actually practice with those crazy handwriting workbooks that Shane gave you, did you? Before he could finish, his chair was lightly kicked. Evan stretched out his leg, his expression flat. Does it look like I would? He told him to hurry up and pass the form along. As Andy signed his name, he suddenly gasped. Hey, he exclaimed. Shane's birthday is coming up soon. Evan turned to look at him, asking how he knew. Leo leaned over and asked the same question. Andy pointed to the form. His ID number, he said. It's written right here. Leo peered closer. August 11th, he read. Holy crap, that's this Friday. After Andy's comment about the workbooks, Chloe had been staring intently at Evan, oblivious to the chatter of the two boys beside her. Evan met her gaze, his pen spinning slowing to a halt. He felt a prickle of unease under her scrutiny. Just as Chloe opened her mouth to speak, Mark called out from the classroom door, telling Evan that Ms. Peterson wanted to see him in her office. Evan felt a wave of relief and immediately got up, heading out through the back. The hallway was mostly empty. As Evan walked, he wondered what Chloe's look had meant. Thinking back, she had been giving him and Shane strange looks ever since their dinner out at the start of summer break. Had she figured something out? He cursed Shane under his breath. It was all his fault with his constant talk of getting married. Who gets married at their age? Lost in thought, he found himself on the skywalk connecting the academic building to the administrative offices. He habitually glanced up toward the 6th floor, where Class 1 was located. Even though it was break time, the 6th floor hallway was deserted. The teachers in the honors track were strict. Getting caught with a phone meant immediate confiscation. He hadn't spoken to Shane all day. Evan had always thought being in a relationship would be simple. The classroom, his house, Shane's house, the science lab. There were plenty of places to meet. But now, just one semester later, it felt like they had nowhere to go. Sometimes he would wake up from a nap during study hall, look at the empty seat beside him, and feel a pang of disorientation, just like Andy had described. Had Shane really been in their class? Had someone really sat next to him? Were he and Shane really together? These fleeting moments of doubt would vanish after school, when Shane would appear with a stack of practice tests and sit down beside him. Someone emerged from the Class 1 classroom, and Evan quickly looked away, turning into the office. Evan had left the classroom to escape Chloe's probing gaze, only to find himself under the scrutiny of someone else in the office. Ms. Peterson had called him in but then said nothing. She sat silently grading papers, occasionally looking up at him. After 10 minutes of standing awkwardly in front of her desk, the bell for the next class rang. Evan started to say goodbye. Stay put, Ms. Peterson snapped, tapping her pen on the desk. Who said you could leave? The next period is study hall. You're not going back. So Evan slouched back against the wall. Ms. Peterson had been in torment for weeks. She had been a teacher for many years and had seen her share of student romances, but this was the first time it involved two boys. She had considered various solutions. The most common was to contact the parents, but after thinking about their respective family situations, she quickly dismissed the idea. The next option was to report it to the school administration, but that was also problematic, as it would still involve notifying the parents. That left only one option, to talk to them directly. With Shane no longer in her class, she had to start with Evan. She had prepared for the conversation, compiling a list of the negative impacts of young love and planning to critique their behavior. But she soon realized that none of the usual problems associated with student romances applied to them. In fact, they seemed to be having a positive influence on each other. This made her task even more difficult. She decided to be direct. I hear you're in a relationship. As expected, The boy who had been slouching immediately stood up straight, his body tensing. She pressed on, asking if it was true, and who the other person was. Was it someone from their class? Evan's heart, which had been lodged in his throat, dropped back into his chest. He remembered mentioning it in a small group chat. There were about a dozen people in it. It was plausible that one of them had let it slip, and the rumor had eventually reached Ms. Peterson. He clenched and unclenched his fists, his knuckles white. He admitted it was true but lied that she wasn't in their class. She was Canadian. Ms. Peterson almost laughed in exasperation. The headache that had been plaguing her for days seemed to ease slightly. She told him to be serious. They were having an important conversation. She sighed, saying she used to boast to the other teachers that he might get into all sorts of trouble, but he would never get caught up in a romance. Now she had to eat her words. He retorted that it was her own boast. She couldn't blame it on him. She wrapped his arm with a rolled-up paper. Was that any way to talk? She reminded him of the times she had taken the heat from the administration for him, asking if she had ever complained. She told him that he knew why she had called him in. He knew. He wasn't breaking up with her. She said she understood that at his age, it was easy to mistake friendship for romantic love. He cut her off coolly. No mistake. He looked down, his voice calm. I know the difference. Ms. Peterson took a sip of her tea and took 3 deep breaths. So, you're saying you won't break up? That's right. She told him that in all her years of teaching, she had seen very few high school relationships last, especially in a situation like his. She stopped herself mid-sentence, her face flushing. Evan, misunderstanding her hesitation, said he knew his situation was a mess. He paused, then added that it seemed to be getting a little better now. He would work his ass off senior year. If he could get into a college in the capital, great. If not, he'd go to a school in the next city over. He'd still be close to Shane. His mother was in another country now. Once he turned 18, he would be completely free of Keith. He could get a job, rent a place in the capital, and live his own life. Things did seem to be getting better. For the first time, he dared to imagine a future for himself. That wasn't what she meant. Ms. Peterson felt a lump form in her throat. A mix of emotions churned inside her. Her pen scratched a series of random lines on the paper in front of her. 2 small figures argued in her mind. If she told him everything, she couldn't be sure it would make things better. If she didn't, she would be failing in her duty as a teacher. Evan asked if the school administration knew. He told her not to worry. 2 of his demerits had already been cleared. 1 more wouldn't make a difference. She told him to shut up and stop making her angry. The tension in her snapped. She asked, her voice weary, if he had really thought this through. Was he sure? He said he was. She took a deep breath. You're only 17, she said, stopping herself again. Do you have any idea what this means for you? He replied, his voice firm, that he knew he understood, and he wasn't breaking up with her. Ms. Peterson had thought she was prepared, but in the end, she was at a loss for words. She couldn't bring herself to attack a student's orientation, nor could she force them to break up. She slammed her pen down on the desk. Fine, she said, this is the path you've chosen. I can't interfere, but you have to listen to me, Evan. At your age, with your experience, you can't offer each other any real security. The road ahead of you is filled with unimaginable difficulties that you can't see yet, and I can't even begin to explain them to you. If you insist on this, you must be prepared for the consequences. The fallout, if you're discovered, could be far worse than you can imagine. Do you understand? Evan looked down, silent for a moment, then said he understood. She waved a tired hand. Go back to class. As he turned to leave, she grabbed his sleeve. And another thing, she said, don't do anything that students your age shouldn't be doing. Do you hear me? She emphasized, not a single thing. He grunted in acknowledgement. He turned again, and again she pulled him back. And, she said, absolutely no letting it affect your studies. If your grades drop, I will make sure you two are separated. Got it? He grunted again. The third time she grabbed him, he was visibly annoyed. Her expression softened. And, she said, her eyes downcast, if anything ever happens, come to me first. Evan paused. After a long moment, he said, I will. After Evan left, the teacher from the next classroom, who had been listening in, poked her head out. She told Ms. Peterson that young love was normal. There was no need to be so dramatic about it. She pointed out that Evan's grades had been improving dramatically. If it were her, she said, she would just let it be. You don't understand, Ms. Peterson replied, taking a long drink of her tea. She stared out the window and sighed heavily. Evan left the office. Study hall was already half over. He stared at his feet as he walked, puzzled by Ms. Peterson's about the difficult road ahead. He didn't see what was so difficult. School was easy enough. Making money was too. He could work a couple of part-time jobs and split the rent with Shane. All he had to do was get through this year. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He took it out distractedly. It was a message from Shane, saying he couldn't meet today. The car sped down the highway, moving faster than the surrounding traffic. Shane glanced at the single-word reply on his phone, K, before tossing it into his backpack. He turned to look at the woman in the driver's seat. Eleanor's hair was messily pinned up, strands escaping around her ears. She wore lipstick to add color to her face, but she still looked exhausted. She had been like this for a while, and it was only getting worse. Shane had asked what was wrong several times, but each time she would just give him a long, searching look and say it was nothing. Today, she had sent him a message before school even ended, saying she was picking him up. Traffic was backed up before they even reached the expressway. Shane stared at the sea of red taillights ahead and asked if something had happened. She gave him the same answer as always. No. He told her she looked tired. She claimed it was just the stress of the past few months catching up with her. Now that things had settled down, she was feeling restless. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. She glanced at him. From now on, she said, she would be driving him to and from school every day. Shane's fingers curled slightly. That's not necessary, he said. She continued as if she hadn't heard him. We'll have breakfast together in the morning, and you'll come straight out after school. I'll be waiting for you at the gate. Just like today. Shane was about to argue, but when he turned, he met her gaze. Her eyes, usually so bright and sharp, were dull and lifeless. It looked as if she hadn't slept in days. As the car behind them honked, Shane looked away. Fine, he said. Drive safely. There's a lot of traffic. Back home, Shane took a quick shower. He had just sat down at his desk and opened his notebook when he heard a series of dull, crashing sounds from outside his room. The living room was dark. He walked quickly to Eleanor's door and knocked twice. When there was no answer, he pushed the door open. Eleanor was hunched over her desk, her elbows on the surface, her fingers buried in her hair. Her long hair was disheveled. A glass lay shattered on the floor, along with her phone. Her breathing was heavy. Hearing him enter, she looked up, dazed. After a moment, she asked what he was doing there. Shane stood in the doorway, a sudden realization dawning on him. He knew why this version of Eleanor felt so familiar. This was how she had been for a long time after she found out his father had another child, one who was older than him. He said he heard a noise. He walked over and squatted down to pick up the pieces of broken glass. Eleanor shot up from her chair, telling him not to. She pushed her hair back, her voice frantic. Don't cut yourself. I'll get it. But Shane had already gathered the shards and thrown them in the trash. He picked up her phone from the floor. As he was about to hand it to her, the screen lit up. The next second, it was gone from his hand. Eleanor had snatched it away. She claimed she had just accidentally knocked over a glass. She tucked the phone screen down on the desk. Did I scare you? She asked. He said no. He thought for a moment, then asked if she was feeling unwell. Eleanor paused, then shook her head. No, of course not. She told him to go back to his room, finish his homework, and get to bed early. They had to be up for breakfast. Shane frowned, about to press further, but her hand was already on his back, gently pushing him toward the door. It's fine, she said. I just have some work to take care of. He reminded her that she said she had no work for a while. Just tying up some loose ends on a project, she explained, smiling at her precious son. It'll be over soon. It's fine, really. Back in his room, Shane replayed the scene in his mind. Was his father's family still contacting her? Was the divorce not as settled as she claimed? He sat at his desk, silently spinning his pen, his thoughts a tangled mess. He couldn't focus. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the message from his boyfriend. What are you doing? He didn't reply. Instead, he put down his pen and initiated a video call. Evan was sitting on the balcony, enjoying the evening breeze, when the call came through. He was surprised. They usually finished their homework together in the classroom after school, and with Eleanor constantly in and out of Shane's room, they hadn't video chatted since school started. He answered immediately. The wind whipped his hair across his face. He impatiently pushed it back, revealing his pale features. You home? He asked. Shane confirmed he was. My mom picked me up, he explained. We just got back. Evan grunted an acknowledgement and leaned back against the security bars. I thought something was up. She'll be doing it for a while, Shane said. Evan paused. For a while meant that Shane would have to leave right after school every day. There would be no more time for studying together in an empty classroom. Seeing his silence, Shane explained that she seemed to be going through something. Her mood was off. Maybe in a few days. Evan cut him off, his tone deliberately casual. Good. Staying late every day was a pain in the ass anyway. He added, a bit awkwardly, you should spend more time with her. Shane agreed. Want to do some homework? Evan was about to say yes, but the word changed on his lips. Let's just hang up and do it. What if your mom comes in? After a 2-second silence, Shane agreed. Just as his finger was about to end the call, the voice on the other end shouted, Wait. Shane paused. Yeah. The video call had been so unexpected that Evan had almost forgotten the real reason he wanted to talk. He ran a hand through his hair. This Friday, you free after school? Shane instinctively glanced at his calendar. Friday, August 11th. Every year on this day, Eleanor would have a gift delivered to the house. Over time, he had come to remember his own birthday. Yeah, I'm free. Why? He asked. What do you think? Evan said. Obviously, I'm taking you out. To the cyber cafe. On Friday, the moment the final bell rang, Evan was out of the school. He went to a mall he rarely visited, asked a staff member for directions, and took the escalator up to a pen shop tucked away in a corner on the 3rd floor. The shop was empty. The owner, who had been playing on his phone, quickly straightened up. Evan had chosen this place after days of scrolling through online reviews. He squinted at the glass display cases, overwhelmed by the variety of pens. The owner greeted him and asked what he was looking for. Did he need a recommendation? Was it for himself or someone else? A gift, Evan said. The owner immediately bent down and pulled out several popular models, asking as he did if it was for a friend or an older relative. Evan's gaze, which had been sweeping across the display, stopped. For my boyfriend, he said quickly. The owner's hands fumbled for a moment. He quickly selected several delicate, pastel-colored pens and placed them on the counter. He told Evan he was in luck. These were new models, exclusive to their store in the city. All the girls who came in recently had been buying these. As for a guy, Evan interrupted. He pointed to a deep blue fountain pen in the display case. That one, he asked how much. The owner, still flustered, replied that it was $99. Evan stuffed his hands in his pockets and stared at the pen with a grim expression. After a long, silent standoff, he gritted his teeth. Wrap it up. He left the store, gift bag in hand, mentally calculating his remaining allowance. He used to be careless with money. He hadn't planned on going to college and saw little point in saving. There was a self-destructive streak to his spending, with most of his money going to cigarettes and gaming. From now on, he decided he would limit himself to $5 a day. No smoking, no cybercafes. That should be enough to get him through senior year. Lost in thought, he was walking through the mall when something caught his eye. He stopped, then slowly backed up. He stared at the small cakes in the window of a bakery, an internal battle raging. Save the money. But it's not a birthday without a cake. Shane's too old for cake. He's still your boyfriend. Isn't it childish for two guys to eat cake together? 3 minutes later, Evan stood stone-faced in front of the bakery counter. I'd like to order a small. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out. It was a message from Shane. Sorry, can't make it. Last-minute family dinner. Is going to run late. Shane had just finished changing when he opened his bedroom door and saw Eleanor, already dressed up and waiting. She seemed surprised to see him ready. As she put on her earrings, she told him to get in the car. They were going to his grandmother's for his birthday. Shane told her he already had plans. In that instant, Eleanor's expression turned ugly. She forbade him from going, her voice cold. She even had his grandmother call and plead with him. They were at a standoff for half an hour. It wasn't until Shane noticed several boxes of prescription medication in her open handbag that he finally, reluctantly, agreed. Shane wasn't close with his relatives on either side. He sat with a group of cousins whose names he couldn't remember, listening numbly as they played a party game. To them, he was always the one who gets straight A's. One of them asked if he wanted to play, but another quickly interjected, saying that of course Shane didn't play games like that. Then Eleanor paraded him in front of the older relatives, where he sat on the sofa for what felt like an eternity, listening to them discuss his grades and his future. The room was filled with cheerful chatter, but he barely spoke a word. Halfway through, he got a text from his boyfriend. Was the food good? Shane replied, not as good as chili. Finally, late at night, they were in the car, heading home. The argument from earlier hung in the air between them. Neither of them spoke. When they got home, Shane was about to head straight upstairs when Eleanor called his name. She asked if he had heard what his grandmother said about that school in New York. I'm not going abroad, Shane answered, his voice flat. She tried again, suggesting he could at least look into it. He repeated himself. I'm not going. Don't bring it up again. Eleanor met his gaze for a few seconds, then looked away, ending the conversation. Back in his room, Shane felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. He dumped the pile of gift boxes on his desk and was about to head for the shower when his phone buzzed. You home? Shane looked at the message, a reply from earlier in the night. Yeah, just got in. The next message read, balcony. Shane stared at the word, puzzled for a moment before it clicked. He turned, opened the glass door, and stepped out onto his balcony, looking down. The streetlights in the complex cast a dim glow. The branches of the trees swayed in the summer night breeze. Underneath the dense foliage, he could just make out the figure of a boy sitting on a stone bench. His elbow was propped impatiently on the armrest, his legs crossed. Next to him, on the empty part of the bench, sat a small box. The phone call came just as Evan was swatting away a mosquito. Shane. Evan tilted his head up, directing all his frustration with the insects at the figure on the balcony. Why the hell are there so many trees in your neighborhood? A smile finally broke through the tension that had held Shane's face all day. Wait for me, he said. I'm coming down. Don't, Evan said quickly. Just stay on the balcony. Your living room curtains aren't fully closed. Your mom's on the phone on the sofa. The words were out before he could stop them. He felt like a creep spying on someone's family. Shane was quiet for a moment, as if debating what to do. Finally, he asked how Evan got in. The security guard has seen me before, Evan explained. I told him I was here to walk your dog. Shane asked when he got there and why he didn't say anything. Evan was evasive. Not long ago, He added, "You ask a lot of questions, Shane." Evan stood up, meeting his gaze from within the dark shadows of the trees. "Can you see me?" Shane said he could. He watched as Evan turned and picked up the object from the bench. After a moment of fumbling, a small spark flickered in the darkness. Evan turned back, holding a small cake with a single lit candle. With one hand holding the cake and the other holding his phone to his ear, he looked up and said, "Happy 18th birthday, Shane." Shane had been forced to play the role of the birthday boy all day, his only lines being yes, no, and I don't. The tedious charade had been nearing its end. But now, with Evan holding up a tiny cake from afar and wishing him a happy birthday, the day suddenly felt vibrant and real. Shane stood on his balcony in silence for a long time before he spoke. "Where'd you get the lighter? Didn't you quit smoking?" His boyfriend's face immediately hardened. "The bakery gave it to me," he snapped. "When I say I quit, I quit. You think I'd lie to you?" The small flame made Evan's eyes glitter. He frowned, impatient. "Hurry up and blow it out. This is heavy." Shane took a short, sharp breath. A small puff of air traveled down, and the candle flame was extinguished. They both stared, surprised. Evan looked at the cake for a few seconds, then looked back up. "All right, it's done. You're not getting any of this. I'm eating it myself." Shane asked if that was allowed. Evan shot back, "What, you want me to climb the wall and deliver it to you?" He added that he could try. Evan, resisting the urge to throw the cake at Shane's face, sat back down on the bench and dug a plastic fork into it. Shane asked how it was. Evan hadn't eaten cake in years. His review was simple. "It's too sweet." They stayed like that for a while, one eating, one watching like a pair of idiots. Shane said maybe he should just jump. "And I'll call 911 for you?" Shane stifled a laugh as he watched him finish the cake. "Why did you come all this way?" "Because your text sounded like you were having a shitty time," Evan said. "I was bored, just wandering around, and ended up here. With a cake? I found it on the street," Evan said, his face a mask of indifference. "It just happened to have your name on it." He couldn't eat another bite. He put the rest of the cake back in its box, planning to stick it in the fridge for later. "I'm heading out, Shane." Shane acknowledged him, telling him not to hang up. Evan picked up the cake box, then remembered something else. He pulled a black gift box from his pocket. "Hey Shane, your present. I'll hide it under this tree. You can come get it after I leave." "I'm coming down now," Shane said. "Don't," Evan warned, "your mom might see." He picked up his cake. "I'm going." After walking a short distance, Evan looked back. Shane was still standing there. The balcony light was off, so all he could see was a tall, slender silhouette. He remembered seeing Shane and his mother get out of the car earlier. They hadn't exchanged a single word. Shane had been carrying a pile of gifts, but his face was completely blank. He had just come from his own birthday celebration, yet he looked utterly alone. Shane saw him stop and was about to speak when Evan suddenly turned and walked back to the stone bench. He looked up at him. "Shane, I never told you this, did I?" "Told me what?" "I like you too." A cool night breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. His boyfriend's hair was a mess, whipped around by the wind, but his eyes, looking up at him, shone brightly in the darkness. "Happy birthday, Shane," he said again, his voice soft through the phone. Senior year flew by. By the time the second round of monthly exams was over, Northwood was settling into early autumn. The weather cooled, and the new fan Evan had just bought was relegated to a corner to gather dust. The blue polo shirt of his school uniform was now out of season. He dug out a button-down shirt and black pants he had rarely worn and threw them on. He habitually left the top button undone, but after slinging his backpack over his shoulder, he hesitated, then fastened it as well. It didn't look as nerdy as he thought it would. After brushing his teeth, he checked his reflection a few times before heading out. "Wait." Keith, sitting at the kitchen table, suddenly spoke. Evan paused, glancing back at him coldly. "Dad made some noodles. Eat something before you go." Keith, his mouth full, gestured with his chopsticks toward the pot on the table. The room fell silent. Keith had been trying to casually mend their relationship, but when he got no response, he slowly looked up. "What are you looking at?" "Come eat." "Oh, and I bought some buns." The line was a mile long. "Take them to school. Share some with your friends, you hear? Here, put them in your bag." An empty beer bottle flew through the air, whizzing past Keith's face and shattering against the wall with a sharp crack. Keith flinched, his chopsticks frozen in midair. He stared at the wall for a moment before turning to yell. "You say that word again, and I'll rip your mouth off," Evan said. "And don't talk to me." He walked out of the apartment, leaving Keith glaring at his back, too scared to say another word. As he was about to head downstairs, he caught a glimpse of a small head and a pigtail peeking around the corner of the landing above. The little girl from upstairs, wearing a pink backpack, was hiding behind the railing, clearly waiting for her parents to take her to school. She blinked at him and called out, "Big brother." Evan looked up at her. "What? Are you going to school?" He didn't bother to answer, starting down the stairs. "Big brother," she called out again, stopping him. She asked why the other big brother didn't come to visit anymore. Evan's steps faltered. "What brother?" "The one who's really tall and handsome." "When did you see him?" Evan asked, frowning. "He was right here," she said, pointing to the small landing outside Evan's door. "She said he was waiting for you to wake up." "When is he coming back?" "He's not," Evan told her bluntly. The little girl's face fell. She took a couple of steps down. "Can you ask him to come back?" "What for?" The little girl clutched the hem of her white dress, a gap-toothed grin spreading across her face. "I want to be his girlfriend." She squatted down, grabbing the railings and pressing her face against them. "Can you? Please, please, please?" "No." "Why not?" She whined, about to protest. "He already has a boyfriend," Evan said. He reached out and gently tapped her on the forehead. "You don't have a chance, kid." Ms. Peterson's moods had been swinging wildly lately. Every time she saw Evan, she felt a wave of anxiety. But then she would look at the class's steadily improving test scores and feel a surge of pride. She felt like she was developing a split personality. The class average had gone up again on the latest monthly exam. As she handed back the papers, she gave each student a lollipop. At lunchtime, the students who stayed behind to study all had candy sticks dangling from their mouths. "I'm done. I'm done," Chloe exclaimed, throwing her pen down in frustration. "I studied so hard, and my math score is 7 points lower than last time." Andy tried to comfort her. "Hey, this month's test was just hard. Didn't you notice your class rank went up? We all did poorly." He turned and saw his other friend staring at his test paper with a frown. "What's up, Evan?" Andy asked. "You got a great score and you're still not happy? You almost broke into the top 400 this time." "What good is the top 400? Evan thought. His overall score was still miles away from what he needed for those universities. His starting point had been so low that at first, his rank had shot up. But the further he went, the slower his progress became, and the harder it was to raise his score. He looked at the paper, which showed little improvement from the last one, and rubbed his face in frustration, not saying a word. The chair beside him was pulled out. Evan, assuming it was Andy, was about to tell him to go back to his own seat when he looked up. A blank exam paper was placed on his desk, followed by a familiar, stoic face. Evan pushed the lollipop into the corner of his cheek and stared at him, stunned. Before he could speak, Andy blurted out, "Shane? What are you doing here? You're not going home for lunch?" Shane replied that his family was busy, so he stayed at school. As he spoke, he reached over and took the test paper from Evan's hand. Evan, his hand still frozen in the air, kicked the leg of the adjacent chair. "What are you doing looking at someone else's test?" Shane glanced at his score. "Not bad," he commented. "Did Peterson go over the test yet? Was there anything you didn't understand?" "She hasn't." "Not bad." The total score is still 80 points too low. The atmosphere in Class 7 was much more relaxed than in the honors class. Some students were napping, some were studying, and others were quietly talking. No one was paying attention to the back row. So Shane reached out and ruffled his boyfriend's hair as he leaned over his desk. "I'll explain it to you." An hour later, Andy returned victorious from a lengthy debate with the class president. He found his friend leaning against the wall, listening to an explanation, a lollipop stick dangling from his mouth like a cigarette. Andy remembered he also had a few questions he didn't understand. With Shane here, it was the perfect opportunity. He bent down and rummaged through his messy desk drawer, finally pulling out his test paper. He turned around. Shane was already getting up. "What is it?" Andy was taken aback. "You're leaving already?" "Yeah," Shane said. "Class starts in 10 minutes. Andy clutched his paper full of mistakes and watched forlornly as Shane gathered his things and left, his own lollipop still in his mouth. He sighed and sat back down, deciding he would just ask Ms. Peterson after school. Then a thought struck him. He sat up straight and stared at the desk next to him. Evan was startled by his sudden movement and frowned. "What's wrong with you?" The lollipop in Shane's mouth had a pink stick. "Strawberry flavored." "You were the only one in the whole class who got a strawberry one," Andy stated. "But wasn't that in your mouth a minute ago?" They stared at each other in silence. Then, Andy noticed something else. The sleeves of Evan's shirt, which had been a mess all morning, were now neatly and crisply folded, in the exact same way Shane always wore his. Evan followed Andy's gaze down to his own arms. After a moment, he stood up. "I'm going to the bathroom." "Hey, I'll come with you." "What was that about?" "Don't follow me, it's annoying." Evan hid by the window near the restrooms, planning to wait until class started before going back. He stuffed his hands in his pockets and looked around boredly, his eyes eventually drifting up to the 6th floor. It was all Shane's fault, he thought, insisting on taking his candy and then messing with his sleeves. 2 minutes until the bell. Evan took out his phone and opened his chat with Shane. He had just typed 2 words when his phone vibrated. A text message appeared at the top of the screen. An unknown number. "Hello, Evan. Please come to the coffee shop at 11 North Elm Street now." Evan paused, frowning in confusion. North Elm Street? That was right behind the school. He rarely texted anyone. The last message he'd received was from a guy at another school looking for a fight months ago. But the tone of this message didn't seem like a challenge. The school bell rang. Evan swiped the message away, about to head to class, when his phone buzzed again. "Unknown number. This is Shane's mother. I'd like to have a serious talk with you about him." Evan ran into Mr. Howard on his way out. Mr. Howard asked where he was going. Evan said he was helping a teacher move some things. In the past, Mr. Howard would have grabbed him by the collar and dragged him back to class. But Evan had been on his best behavior lately, so he believed him and waved him on. As soon as Mr. Howard disappeared into the building, Evan expertly scaled the back wall of the school. He was distracted on the way to the coffee shop. Why did Shane's mother want to see him? They weren't in the same class anymore, not even desk mates. What could she possibly want with him? His mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario. She knew about them. As for how, it could have been the security cameras, his phone, or maybe she had seen him on Shane's birthday from her living room window. What was he thinking, sitting out there feeding the mosquitoes? He could have just hidden the gift and left. This single text message had caught him completely off guard. He wondered what she would say to him. He wasn't good at arguing or reasoning with people. He preferred to use his fists. So he stared at the sidewalk as he walked, silently rehearsing the conversation in his head. "I saw everything. Are you and my son dating?" "Yes." "You will break up with my son immediately. Tell your son to say that to me. Name your price. How much will it take for you to leave my son alone?" "I'll have to think about that." A bitter, humorless smile touched his lips. Did Shane know his mother had contacted him? Based on his behavior at lunch, probably not. That was good. Evan had never been afraid of anything. He had been fighting back against Keith, a man 3 times his size, since he was a child. He would charge into a fight even when outnumbered. But as he stood in front of the coffee shop, he hesitated. After a few seconds, he pushed his bangs back from his forehead and opened the door. Eleanor had been sitting in the coffee shop since she dropped her son off at school that morning. She had reserved the entire place to ensure they wouldn't be disturbed, giving her a quiet space to plan her strategy. She had been a formidable negotiator in the business world for over a decade, but today, facing a 17-year-old high school student, she felt a tremor of anxiety. When the door opened, she signaled for the staff member she had spoken to earlier to stay back. The employee understood, refilled her coffee, and retreated to the kitchen. Eleanor looked up and saw the messy, untamed hair. Certain images flashed in her mind, and a wave of nausea washed over her. Her fingers trembled slightly, and she subtly leaned back in her chair, trying to keep her voice steady. "See." The chair scraped loudly against the floor as the boy sat down across from her. They sat in silence, each sizing up the other. After a long moment, Eleanor, fighting her revulsion, finally spoke. "You know why I asked you here, don't you?" "I don't," Evan said. "You and Shane," she said. "I saw everything." She saw the boy's fingers twitch. Then he replied coolly, "Oh." She demanded that he break up with him immediately. He told her to have her son say that to him. Eleanor looked at his indifferent expression, and the familiar anxiety and panic began to rise again. She struggled to maintain her composure, her long, elegant fingers clenching and unclenching. Finally, she said calmly, "Just tell me what you want. How much money will it take for you to leave my son alone?" As the words left her mouth, she thought she heard a faint, humorless laugh from across the table. The boy looked down, his voice lazy. "I'll have to think about that." That laugh reminded her of her recent encounters with another man, and her nerves stretched even tighter. She took a deep breath. "Fine. But let me be clear. Once you take this money, I never want to see you or your father near me or Shane again." At the mention of his father, Evan's head snapped up. All expression vanished from his face. He stared at her, his breathing seeming to stop. Eleanor's face was equally impassive. "I know you two have a plan, but I'm telling you now, I have records of every payment, every text message, every phone call. I've contacted my lawyer. The amount of money involved is enough to put you both in prison for a very long time." Evan just stared at her, saying nothing. "Of course, if I wanted to press charges, I wouldn't have asked you here today. Let me be direct. I'm willing to pay to make this problem go away. I will give you one final payment. You will have your father delete all the photos, and you will sign a guarantee." "What photos?" the boy asked, his voice wooden. Eleanor froze, the images flooding back, unwanted. She closed her eyes. "What do you think?" "What photos?" "The ones from the library, the park." She paused. "Or are there others?" "The library." The word hit Evan like a physical blow, the memory lancing through him. Took a long moment for him to recall. In the days after Keith came back, he and Shane had only gone to the library once. They had studied, read, and on their way out, shared a kiss in what they thought was a deserted corner of the park. He had gone home shortly after, and Keith had returned later that evening. And then, a few days later, Keith had asked him why he wasn't going out anymore. "There are no others," he heard himself say. Eleanor didn't believe him, but she was tired of arguing the point. "In any case, after we settle this today, you will delete everything in front of me, and you will break up with my son. If you or your father ever try to extort me again, I will take legal action. Now, how much do you want?" "How did he find you?" Evan asked. The question unleashed a torrent of nightmares that had been plaguing Eleanor for weeks. She would never forget that day, sitting in her car, when a man had knocked on her window. When she lowered it, the man had grinned, revealing a set of yellowed teeth, and called her in-law. The torment had begun at that moment. She had received photos of her son kissing another boy, followed by texts and calls demanding money. She could barely sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice. "Go ahead, call the cops. Before they lock me up, I'll plaster pictures of your son being a fag all over this city. Don't let the kids know about this. They look pretty good together. You think my son is turning your son gay? Or is it the other way around?" Eleanor couldn't understand why Evan was playing dumb. She forced the memories away and repeated, her voice cold, "How much do you want?" As she spoke, her gaze fell on his arm. Evan quickly pulled his hand back, hiding it under the table, concealing the neatly folded sleeve that Shane had fixed for him at lunch. He asked, his voice flat, "How much did he take from you in total?" 80,000. I'll go talk to him about it. So he was agreeing. Eleanor pushed a file across the table. "These are the relevant legal statutes my lawyer prepared. It clearly outlines the prison sentences for this type of blackmail and extortion." In truth, Eleanor had no intention of pressing charges. She couldn't bear the thought of anyone else knowing about this. So when she saw Evan take the file, a wave of relief washed over her. "Tell your father to text me with the amount. And, while I'm arranging for Shane's transfer to another school, I want you to stay away from him. Don't go to school, don't contact him. I don't want him to be affected. That shouldn't be too difficult for you, right?" He agreed. With everything settled, Eleanor nodded, unwilling to stay a moment longer. She picked up her handbag and stood to leave. But after 2 steps, she stopped and turned back. She swallowed hard before asking in a low voice, "One last thing. You and Shane, did you force him?" Her voice was barely a whisper, the desperate plea of a drowning person. Evan looked down at his sleeve and said yes. A great weight seemed to lift from Eleanor's shoulders. She picked up the untouched cup of coffee from the table and threw its contents in his face. The brown liquid streamed from his hair to his chin, soaking the front of his white uniform shirt. Evan instinctively closed his eyes. When he opened them, he heard Eleanor's trembling voice. "You ruined my son. You're just as disgusting as your father." There was only one employee in the coffee shop. The kitchen had a glass wall, so while she couldn't hear the conversation, she had seen everything. The shop had been booked for a private event, so she was the only one working. After the woman left, she had sat with the boy for half an hour. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore and brought a warm, damp towel out to him. "Sir, do you need—" He suddenly stood up, and she jumped back, startled. His face was blank, and the coffee on his shirt had already dried. He turned to leave, then stopped. "How much?" The girl, flustered, stammered that it was okay. The lady had already paid. Evan looked up at the menu board, then pulled the $30 he had brought for lunch from his pocket, placed it on the table and walked out. August was usually the most pleasant month in Northwood. But as Evan walked down the street, he felt as if he were in a deep freeze, his movements stiff and robotic. The smell of stale coffee clung to him. His mind was a blank. When he finally came to his senses, he was standing in the kitchenware aisle of a supermarket. He scanned the shelves, selected a long, slender knife, and took it to the checkout. His fingers were so numb that he entered his PIN wrong twice, nearly locking his card. The cashier was about to put the knife in a bag, but he simply took it and walked out. When he arrived back at his old apartment complex, the neighbors saw the stains on his clothes and the object in his hand and quickly scurried away. Only one person was oblivious enough to speak to him. "Big brother, are you home from school too?" The little girl was sitting on the steps. "My class went on a field trip today." "Did you?" Evan paused, his hand on the doorknob, and looked at her in silence. "But my mom and dad won't be home for a long time." She propped her chin in her hands. When she saw the knife, she asked, "Are you going to cook today?" "No," Evan said, his voice hoarse. She let out a long, disappointed "oh." Then she remembered something, stood up, and brushed off her skirt. "Big brother, can you take me to get something to eat? I can pay. I have $7 left from my trip." Evan glanced down at where she was tugging on his pants, then reached into his own pocket, only to remember he had left all his cash at the coffee shop. "No," he said. The little girl's face fell. "Okay. Big brother, your shirt is all dirty." Evan didn't reply. He unlocked the door. Just before he closed it, he thought of something and pulled it open again. "If you hear anything today, don't come down, or I'll cut off your pigtails." The little girl gasped and clapped her hands over her hair, her eyes wide. "Why would you?" The door closed. The apartment was empty. Evan threw the knife on the table and went to the bathroom to wash his face. His cheeks, neck, and ears were sticky. The coffee had already stained his skin. He looked in the mirror and tried to scrub away the brownish patches. When that didn't work, he started to scratch at them. A few minutes later, he looked at the red welts on his neck and dropped his hands. He had always thought that once he turned 18, once he graduated and left this place, he would finally be free of Keith. But he had forgotten that someone else had already escaped, and even after all these years, she was still being tormented by him. Keith was shameless. He always used mutually assured destruction as his weapon, always targeting people's weaknesses. He was right. He had nothing to lose. He would take a beating and recover. He would go to jail and get out. Everyone else had too much to lose. He always won. He had turned himself into a human bomb, and no one knew how to defuse him. But Evan was different. If someone stabbed him in his weak spot, he would pull the knife out of his own body and plunge it into theirs. He had less to lose than anyone. When he came out of the bathroom, his hair and clothes were soaked. He took the last half-pack of cigarettes and sat on the balcony, smoking with a blank expression. He leaned back against the security bars and stared up at the sky. For some reason, he thought of a problem Shane had explained to him at lunch. How did it go again? Why couldn't he remember? He stared at the sun until his eyes burned. He didn't blink until his phone vibrated. It was Andy. "Did you fall in the toilet? Why aren't you back yet?" Peterson came by. "I told her you were at the nurse's office. She bought it." "Oh well. Where are you?" Evan stared at the screen for a moment before typing a reply. "There's still candy in my desk drawer." Andy replied with a confused emoji. "Eat it." He glanced at the time. Keith had a routine lately. He would be home by 10 to watch the game. That left only a few hours. Evan sat up, crossing his legs, and began to think methodically. The doors and windows had to be locked. Keith was loud, so he'd need something to gag him. And he suddenly remembered something and jumped up, heading back to his room. He took a key from his backpack, unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk, and pulled it out, dumping its contents on the floor. A pile of miscellaneous items tumbled out. A pink envelope lay on top, stark and obvious. Evan glanced at it once and then looked away. He grabbed a black plastic bag and began to shove everything related to Shane into it. The love letter, his scratch paper from exams, the nearly filled handwriting workbooks, the Doberman stuffed animal. None of it belonged in this room. Nothing related to Shane belonged here. Like he was cleaning up a crime scene, Evan meticulously gathered everything he could remember, then tore his room apart, searching for anything he might have missed. He stripped the bed, overturned the wardrobe, and ripped the award certificates from the wall, checking behind them like a madman. When he was done, the room was in a state of utter chaos. He sat on the floor amidst the wreckage, the black bag beside him. He craved another cigarette, but he had already finished the pack. He ran his hands through his hair and started searching through the mess on the floor. He had never realized how much stuff he had accumulated. His mother's old hair clips, his elementary school uniform, an ancient eraser, and a dusty photo album. It had fallen open during his frantic search. As he stepped over it, he reached down to close it, his eyes catching the photo on the top page. A dozen or so kids stood in a row. At the top, in faded letters, it read Summer Camp Group Photo. The background was the red wall of a temple he had recently visited, so he took a closer look. The photo had been taken right after he had gotten into a fight with some of the other boys. He had been ostracized by the other kids and the camp counselors, so he was standing at the far left of the group, a good distance from everyone else. The only other outcast was standing on the step above him. In the photo, Evan, fresh from his victory, was standing tall, chest puffed out, staring defiantly at the camera. He made the sniffling, teary-eyed crybaby behind him look even more pathetic. He glanced at it, then closed the album and tossed it into a drawer, continuing his search. A few seconds later, something felt wrong. He slowly turned his head and stared at the drawer for a moment before reaching for the album again. His fingers were stiff as he flipped through the pages, as if he were using his hands for the first time. He saw his grandfather, Keith, his mother. After what felt like an eternity, he found the photo again. His memories of the summer camp were hazy. He only remembered that the crybaby had small eyes, was skinny, and when he cried, his eyes disappeared completely. He stared at the tear-streaked face in the photo for a long time before reaching for the picture itself. The album was old, and the plastic film had fused with the photo. He tried to peel it away, his frustration mounting with each failed attempt. A cool autumn breeze blew in through the window, but he was sweating profusely. He finally managed to pull the photo free. He stared at the familiar features of the crying boy for a long time. Then, with trembling fingers, he turned it over. The names of everyone in the photo were written on the back. He found his own name, then tiredly lifted his gaze to the name written above it. Chun Jingshan. A few tears splashed onto the photo, blurring the ink. In that moment, it felt as if a switch had been flipped in Evan's brain. The stickiness on his skin, the stinging on his neck, the crushing weight in his chest. It all came rushing back, a tidal wave of pain that left him speechless. He finally lost control. His hands shook violently, and tears streamed down his face. The name on the photo was blurry. He tried to wipe away the tears, but they wouldn't stop. A wave of nausea rose in his throat. He dropped the photo and ran from the room, collapsing in the bathroom and vomiting until his stomach was empty. He hadn't eaten anything, but he retched as if trying to expel his own organs. His face was streaked with tears, his senses overwhelmed by the bitter taste of bile. Why? He thought. He rarely dwelled on such things, but now he couldn't stop asking himself, why? There were so many people in the world, why him? Why was he born? Why didn't she take him with her? Why had his life always been such a struggle? Eleanor was probably asking herself the same question. Why did her son have to meet someone like him? Why did Shane have to meet him? When Keith came home, the apartment was dark. He grumbled about the lights being off and went to his room to grab a change of clothes for his shower. When he came out, he froze. The front door was locked, and the shoe rack had been moved to block it. Evan stood in front of it, his face pale and expressionless, watching him. "Keith," he said, "are you coming with me? Or are you dying with me?" Keith was truly scared. The older you get, the more you fear death. In his youth, he had been willing to burn the world down with him. Now, all he had left was his vicious mouth. But Evan was young. He didn't want to burn the world down. He just wanted to destroy Keith. Even though they weren't close, Keith had watched him grow up. He knew Evan meant what he said. This was the calmest they had ever been. Even as a child, Evan would curse and fight back when he was being beaten. Today, he hadn't raised a hand, and his voice was devoid of emotion. Keith sat on the sofa, nervously watching Evan go through his phone. He scanned the room for a weapon but found nothing, which only increased his panic. Evan deleted all the photos of him and Shane, then read through the messages Keith had sent to Eleanor. He stared into space for a long time, silently repeating to himself, "No, you can't. It's not worth it." He sat on the sofa all night, and Keith sat beside him on edge. Evan didn't say a word, but Keith felt as if he were standing on a cliff, ready to be pushed off at any moment. He was so tense that when Evan finally moved, he flinched and scooted away. But Evan didn't even look at him. As dawn broke, Evan stood up and called Eleanor. She answered after a long time, her voice ragged. I told you not to call me. It's me, Evan said. I'm taking him to turn himself in. It took her a few seconds to process what he had said. Then she shrieked, No, you can't. The sound of breaking glass came through the phone. She lowered her voice, each word trembling. Do you want the whole world to know that you two are? She couldn't finish the sentence. He heard the rattling of a pill bottle. She told him that the authorities would keep it confidential. No, she insisted. No one else can know, do you understand? Do you? How much money do you want? Evan heard the sound of the pills. He clenched his fist. After a long pause, he said, Give me your bank account number. The only fortunate thing was that Keith hadn't spent much of the money. He had started by asking for a few thousand here and there. It wasn't until he found out the value of the car Eleanor drove that he made his big demand for $80,000. The money had been transferred 2 days ago, but the big game he was planning to bet on had only started last night. He hadn't had a chance to gamble it away yet. After Evan transferred the money back, Eleanor, terrified, called again, demanding to know what he was doing. The $3,000 he took before, Evan said, I'll pay it back to you in installments. I've deleted all the photos. It's over. There was a stunned silence on the other end. It seemed Eleanor was finally realizing that the boy might not have been fully involved. But what about your father? He might. I'm taking him with me, Evan said, taking the items from the black plastic bag and placing them in a suitcase. This won't get out. Don't transfer Shane from his school. The line was silent for so long that Evan thought she had hung up. Then he heard her voice. Do it quickly. If you need money for travel or anything else, let me know. And don't let Shane know before you leave. Eleanor could feel her son slipping from her control. She couldn't handle any more surprises. With the money gone, Keith felt as if he had woken up from a pleasant dream. He was angry but too scared to say anything. The amount he had tried to extort had been huge. After a sleepless night, he actually felt a sense of relief. Evan went to the bathroom and splashed water on his face. As he was about to go back to his room, Keith spoke up. How long are you going to keep my phone? That's theft, you know. Oh, Evan said, then call the cops and report me. My patience has a limit, Keith. If you go after the wrong people again, we're both finished. He added coolly, pack your things. I'll give it back when we leave. 3 hours after his last text went unanswered, Shane left his house to find Evan. He was stopped at the door. I'm not feeling well, Eleanor said. I've made an appointment with Dr. Stevens. We're leaving now. You can come with me for the weekend. Dr. Stevens was Eleanor's therapist, the one who had helped her through the divorce. Her practice had recently relocated to the next city over. You go ahead, Shane said. I have plans. I'll take the train over when I'm done. He took a step, but she grabbed his arm. Come with me now. You can see your friends when we get back. She looked at him, her face pale. I'm in a lot of pain right now, Shane. He didn't speak. He stood in the entryway for a long time, one foot already out the door, the words I'll be there as soon as I can on his lips. Then his phone vibrated. Fell asleep. Why are you blowing up my phone? The tension that had been building in Shane's shoulders eased. He looked down and typed a quick reply, telling Evan he was going out of town for a couple of days. Then he looked up at his mother. Let's go. The drive was long, and they spent most of the night on the highway. A few times, Shane took out his phone, and Eleanor would look over at him, her voice sharp. Can you put that away? The light is keeping me awake. It was dawn by the time they reached their destination. At the hotel, Shane was washing his face in the bathroom when he heard Eleanor's voice from the next room. The hotel walls were thick, but he could just make out a single, sharp no. He paused, his face still wet, and went to her door, knocking. When there was no answer, he waited for 2 minutes, then turned to call the front desk for a spare key. The door clicked open. Eleanor stood there, her face ashen. She looked even worse than before. What is it? She asked. I heard a noise, he said. His eyes flickered to the phone in her hand. Were you on a call? No, she denied instinctively, then quickly added, it was a video conference. I haven't been to the office in a while. There's a problem. A video conference at 6 in the morning? He didn't say anything, just looked at her. The familiar anxiety welled up in her. She put a hand on his back. Come on, the driver is waiting downstairs. The clinic was closed to all other patients that day. Shane sat alone on a bench outside the consultation room, his hands dangling between his knees, lost in a tired haze. The last time Eleanor had been this sick was when she found out about his father's affair. She was a perfectionist. Control gave her a sense of security. She couldn't accept her failed marriage and her terrible husband. For a long time after, her need to control Shane had been terrifying. She had to know where he was and who he was with at all times. It wasn't until after extensive therapy that she was able to return to work, and her behavior gradually improved. Why had she relapsed so suddenly? He stared into space, unable to find an answer. He took out his phone and checked the time. 8 o'clock. Someone was probably still asleep. He had a while to wait. He opened the only game on his phone, hoping to stay awake. He saw that the online friends list showed one person active. Their username was Dash. Shane paused, then switched apps and sent a message. About 10 minutes later, he got a reply. Stop bothering me. I'm about to break my record. Shane texted back that he would help him break it when he got back. The reply was blunt. Get lost. I'm playing. Stop distracting me. Shane finally smiled and went back to the game to watch him play. It was Monday afternoon when they returned to Northwood. After 2 days of intensive therapy, Eleanor's condition showed little improvement. She had the driver take them straight to the school. Before Shane got out of the car, she told him she had to go to the office to deal with some urgent matters and might not be able to pick him up. She told him to be home on time. It was the middle of the school day, and the campus was mostly empty, save for a few classes having gym on the field. Shane adjusted his backpack and was about to head toward the academic building when he saw a familiar figure. He stopped, frowning. Evan leaned against the railing on the roof of the library, looking down. The library wasn't very tall, but it had a good vantage point, offering a clear view of most of the campus. He had come during class time specifically to avoid being seen. His plan was to wait for Ms. Peterson to finish her classes, but now that he was here, he couldn't stop himself from looking toward the 6th floor of the senior building. Is he back today? Is he in class? Or studying? Or taking a test? He was lost in thought when a sharp whistle blew from below. He thought he had been spotted and immediately ducked down. After a moment, when nothing happened, he cautiously peeked over the edge. It was just the gym teacher calling back some students who had tried to sneak off to the cafeteria. That teacher also taught his class. He had been the target of that whistle many times. Evan let out a breath and slid down to sit with his back against the wall. He reached into his pocket for a cigarette, but the squeak of the rooftop door opening made him freeze. He thought it was a security guard and looked up lazily. He saw the person whose name he hadn't even dared to think. Evan, his knees bent, was still in a half-sitting position. He stared in disbelief as the other boy walked toward him. Before he could react, Shane was squatting in front of him, his hand firmly tilting his chin up. Shane's fingers brushed against the edges of the bandages on his neck. Evan snapped back to reality and tried to push his hand away. Shane didn't try to pull off the bandages. He felt the coldness of Evan's fingertips and asked what happened. Cat scratched me. Evan's voice was so hoarse he barely recognized it. He hadn't spoken much in the last 2 days. Why are you here? Skipping class? Shane asked. Just got back from getting a rabies shot. The person who wouldn't go to the hospital even when covered in injuries from a fight would never get a rabies shot for a cat scratch. When Evan lied, he usually looked away. But this time, his eyes were fixed on Shane's face. Shane was silent for a few seconds, then pressed the loose edge of the bandage back down. He reached up and pushed Evan's hair back, scanning his face. "Did you get in another fight?" he asked, his voice low. The question nearly broke him. Evan bit his lip, his jaw clenching. He finally told the truth. "No, just an argument." Shane hummed in acknowledgement and ran his fingers through his hair. "Just hang in there. Only 2 semesters left." His throat was raw. Evan was grateful that after 2 days, the swelling in his eyes had finally gone down. "When did you get back? Why aren't you in class?" "Just got to school." After making sure he had no other injuries, Shane let out a weary sigh of relief. "I was with my mom at the clinic for the last 2 days." "Is it serious?" "She was better when we left, but she still has to go back for regular appointments." Evan's throat tightened. After a long moment, he managed a quiet "oh." Shane looked at him, frowning. Evan was never very talkative, but this was different. He was pale and listless. He touched his forehead, then his ear. "What are you doing?" Evan asked, grabbing his wrist. "Checking if you have a fever," Shane said. Normally, Evan would have thrown his hand off, but today he just held his wrist for a moment before placing it back on his own head. Shane, surprised, took the opportunity to gently massage his scalp. His mood lifted slightly. He caught the faint smell of tobacco on Evan and asked why he had been smoking. "Couldn't help it. I don't smoke when I'm with you. Don't smoke when I'm not here either." "That's going to be hard," Evan thought. He hadn't been addicted before, but for the past 2 days, he had been desperate for a cigarette whenever he had a free moment. The bell rang, jolting Evan back to the present. "Next period is physics. You should go back." "You memorized my schedule?" Shane asked. "As if. I just remember this one." "What about you?" "I have to go to Ms. Peterson's office. She caught me skipping to go to the cyber cafe on Friday afternoon." "I'll go with you." "No need." Evan licked his lips. "My next class is gym. If I go to her office now, I'll just be standing there anyway. I'll sit here for a bit longer." "I'll wait for you then," Shane said. "Don't." Evan pushed his hand away. "It's not on your way." Shane was silent for a moment, then relented. "Go see her soon then." Evan nodded. The next second, the back of a warm hand was pressed against his cheek, checking his temperature one last time. Satisfied that he was fine, Shane said, "I don't have to rush home today. I'll come find you in your classroom later." A large speaker was mounted on the wall next to them. The school bell blared, loud enough to make their ears ring. Evan blinked. Amidst the deafening sound, he called out softly, "Shane. Yeah. Let's run away together. Kiss me." The bell rang for 10 seconds. For 10 seconds, someone held his face and kissed him. He breathed in the faint minty scent on Shane, and though it had only been 2 days, it felt like an eternity. Evan propped himself up on his hands, his nails digging into his palms. His mind, which had been in a state of chaos for the past 2 days, suddenly went clear. He was kissed, then released. In a daze, he heard Shane's low voice. "Wait for me after school." The honors class always ended later than the others. During the last period, Shane kept glancing outside. The railing was empty. The wall was empty. The doorway was empty. He took out his phone and sent a message to his top contact. "Class is running late. You can start your homework first." There was no reply. A dull throb started in his temple. Something felt wrong. He couldn't focus on his work. The class dragged on for another 20 minutes. The third time he checked his phone, his heart lurched. He suddenly stood up, grabbed his backpack, and walked out of the classroom, ignoring the surprised looks of his classmates and the teacher's questions. He finally realized what was wrong. The moment he had appeared on the rooftop, Evan's reaction had been all wrong. Shock, confusion, as if he had never expected to see him. Many students stayed for study hall at lunch, but the afternoon was usually deserted. Everyone was in a hurry to get home, eat, and shower before coming back for evening study hall. So when Shane arrived at the Class 7 classroom, it was empty and silent. It wasn't an unfamiliar sight, but today it felt emptier than ever. He walked to the last desk in the back row and looked down. Usually, this desk would be covered with the textbook from the last class, a half-finished worksheet, and a pen without a cap. The inside of the desk was always a mess, a jumble of papers and notebooks that had to be rummaged through before every class. But now, the desk was completely empty. Shane stood there, motionless, for what felt like a long time. Then he pulled out the adjacent chair and sat down. He took a random worksheet from his backpack and started to work on it. Occasionally, he would take out his phone, check it, and make a call. Then he would put it down and continue working. The setting sun cast long shadows across his rigid back, a silent companion in his vigil. He heard a noise from the back door. His pen stopped. He turned around. Ms. Peterson stood there, her expression complicated. They looked at each other for a long time before she spoke. "Why are you still here?" "I'm waiting for Evan," Shane said. Ms. Peterson looked exhausted after a long day of teaching. There were faint, dried tear tracks on her cheeks. She looked at the boy's stubborn, cold expression, clutched the textbook in her hand, and struggled to find the words. "Go home. You don't have to wait. Evan has already unenrolled."